Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 33rd talk in the series called the Virtual Fireside Talks, organised by University of Buckingham, about great lives, great minds. And tonight we do not have Lord John Brown, who very sadly had an accident yesterday that meant that he's had to travel and come back. We wish him very well. He asked particularly for his apologies and regrets to be passed on to you. I'd only spoken to him 24 hours before, and he was absolutely full of energy and commitment and very excited about it. Hope to have him again in the future. So found out about that at 1 o'clock only today, and I went to the world famous Professor David Jacques, who amongst many of his achievements had a whole National Geographic documentary filmed about his work just close to Stonehenge at Blickmead, which has had an audience of 60 million people, which is almost as large as the number watching the talk tonight. And David Jacques is a very well-known archaeologist, a wonderful bon vivant animator of many young archaeologists of all ages, an extraordinarily passionate enthusiast and an academic. Amongst many distinctions, he was selected as one of the 2 top Fulbright scholars in 60 years to go and meet the president. It was then President Obama, one of many distinctions. And tonight we've got a mystery story that I, for one, driving down the A303 to our regular family holidays in Devon, we'd pass Stonehenge and we'd get out, and my parents would talk in awed tones about it. But when I asked them why are they there and how do they get there, they didn't know. And I have been in my entire life waiting for the answer. And tonight the truth is going to be revealed. So David, how are you, and where are you talking tonight to us from?
Well, good evening, Anthony, and everyone. Absolutely thrilled to give the talk. I'm based at home, which is in Ely, just north of Cambridge, and all set up and ready to go.
And is this where you do your writing and thinking? And is that looks like a crown of thorns over your right shoulder? Is that a find?
It isn't a find, actually. It's a present from my next door neighbour.
Rather more prosaically.
Rather more prosaically, it might be blending in. I can't quite see your angle. I'm afraid my hair is it's looking very lockdown and a bit like an exploding armchair at the moment. So it might well be blending into that.
It gives a much better sense of a true academic and scholar at the cutting edge of knowledge. Can I just say, David, from all of us and the numbers we've got up to 1,000, over 1,000 now, looking at this. Can I just say welcome again to all of you? And I am truly sorry that the talk is not Lord John Brown, but I'm truly glad that it is David Jacques. And thank you again for giving us this talk tonight. Can I just say very quickly before handing over to you that do have questions ready, and I'll put them to David. David's going to talk for about 40 minutes, lots of slides and illustrations. And also, if you've enjoyed tonight's series, it's very easy to find out where all the talks are. Tomorrow night, just to mention, we've got one on mental health by the writer Rachel Kelly. Then we've got Bryony Gordon coming next week, and we have Rory Stewart, he was trying for London mayor, who is talking next week, and Greg Doran, who runs the Royal Shakespeare Company, etc. So wonderful range of talks. But David, you are going to solve my lifelong curiosity and everybody else's tonight. And thank you so much again for coming.
Oh,
Over to you,
not,
David.
thanks very much. Not at all, Nancy. I'm going to do my best, everybody, to shine some light on the mystery that is Stonehenge. And part of my way of doing that is to give you insight into the very latest discoveries. And some of you will be aware that there was a major one just in the last month that has held up the Stonehenge tunnel. And I'm going to be giving you some perspectives, and partly because I've been given this opportunity fairly late on, I've just thought, folks, I'm going to completely go for it here. So this is going to be opinionated. I'm going to be imaginative and creative about it and really try and situate the people back into this monument. So here goes. First things first, I mean, this is an extraordinarily long-lived ritual landscape. We have evidence of ritual, religion, whatever worship here from just after the end of the Ice Age, all the way through to, well, past 1800 BC. That happens to be where I'm stopping the talk because of time limits. But really, we have...
David, I'm just going to ask you there, for those who'll be looking like myself, who are not quite certain when the Ice Age were, could you just pinpoint that for us?
Yes, well, I mean, the last British Ice Age lasted from around, roughly, let's say roughly around 14,000 BC to around 9,500 BC. So something that is extra special about Stonehenge right from the beginning is that there is this ritual expression very soon after the ice withdrew. And just so that people can picture it, around 9,000 BC, this landscape would have looked quite like the Siberian tundra. So very, very different look, different sorts of animals running across it. And shall I move on from there, Nancy? Yeah. So yeah, the central question as I put on this slide is what made this place so special? And are there some common denominators that run through that immensely long time period, which arguably, from my point of view, it still has, and I think we all know it intuitively, it still has very special, mysterious hold on us all. What has made it special in all that time? And I've got about 40 minutes to pull this together. And one of the things I want to try and crack is this, we know now that the bluestones, which come from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, it's about 240 kilometres to the west of Stonehenge, we know that these stones were taken all that distance across the Stonehenge. Why would that be? I'd like to try and shine a torch, give you my opinion as to why that would be. But I'd like to start first things first with giving you a clear idea really of the time periods that we're going to be running through. We'll start with the type of culture that was operating in this landscape just after the Ice Age, and it's a hunter-gatherer culture termed Mesolithic, so Middle Stone Age, and that happens to be actually the longest lasting culture that we've had in British history since the end of the Ice Age. It covers about 5,000 years. And if you look at the map, you'll see Blickmead to your centre right, covers actually pretty much all of that period. And you'll also see, if you're looking at Stonehenge, which is just centre left, that there are religious, seemingly religious monuments on the Stonehenge knoll very early on as well. Then we get to the Neolithic. This is the new Stonehenge. When the first farmers come to Britain from the continent, and there are archaeologists traditionally split the Neolithic into 3 ages: the early Neolithic, the first farmers; middle Neolithic, where there's a lot of consolidation, first monuments being built not just in this landscape but elsewhere; and the late Neolithic, which is just really is just the most extraordinary period, as I hope I can get over to you. And I am going to be touching on some other sites as well, partly because I just want to give you an idea of just how enormous the type of stress on resources, just the enormous commitment, literally nationwide, the length and breadth of the British Isles, was put into building ritual landscapes at the end of the late Neolithic. Goodness knows what was going on. I will try and make sense of what was going on. And then we'll get to the early Bronze Age. That runs 2400 to 1800 BC. And this is the advent of metal and gold and the so-called beaker people. Now, let's get moving. So, folks, first monuments on the Stonehenge knoll. These have been known since the late 1960s, but actually up until recently very poorly understood. Pretty extraordinary. So they're sort of totem pole-like posts. Probably not likely that they were all being contemporary with each other, although we can't be sure of that. There may have been replacements for them. But the dates, as best we have them, are from just after the Ice Age, 8,800 BC, running to 6,500 BC. So it's really a colossal time period ago. But I think if we're ever to appreciate the sort of powerful motives that inspired people to start building in this landscape, start building ritual monuments, we have to think about this time and we have to understand it. And bearing in mind the culture is hunter-gatherer, and these people are usually characterised as being highly mobile and not likely to be settling in one place for long periods of time. Certainly there not being enough of them, because these would be pretty sort of disparate, small-scale mobile communities, not the types of groups that would have the resources or the ability really in terms of people power to build monuments. These things are pretty much unique for northwestern Europe. You can see them in the picture here, rather incongruously marked with white circles in the old Stonehenge landscape. So up until the discovery of Blick Meads, which this picture captures visually the distance, about 2 kilometres from Stonehenge, Blick Mead, down in the river valley, until the discovery of Blick Mead, those posts are really seen as very enigmatic, and there's hardly any evidence of hunter-gatherers in the landscape apart from them. But Blick Mead has transformed that situation because we have direct dating evidence and a lot of artefacts from the time of the people who were building those poles up at Stonehenge to the time of the first farmers coming in from Europe around 4000 BC. And it is because of this unique radiocarbon date suite, and I should say we have over 20 dates covering that period, so we're not loosely joining time dots. The site has been called the Cradle of Stonehenge, as well as the missing link in the landscape. And increasingly, other universities' research projects are involving Blick Mead and factoring it in when it comes to understanding the early establishment of the ritual landscape at Stonehenge. So why is it important? Well, a site like Blick Mead helps to answer the why question. Why is Stonehenge where it is? Why was it built where it was? As I'll come to. It's interesting in other ways as well, of course. Some of the people listening in will be aware that Britain actually wasn't the British Isles at all around 8000 BC. It was physically joined to the European continent. And this is a sort of an early example of global warming, that as sea levels rise, Britain becomes detached from the rest of continental Europe, as the diagram shows. But what the diagram doesn't show is the effect that it would have had on people. And this is potentially the worst natural catastrophe that's affected people in the British Isles, because most of the hunter-gatherers would have been living along the river edges or coastal areas, and they would have been pushed inland by this, and we would have probably had a really, to put it in modern parlance, a really significant refugee issue. People being stranded and people having to move to higher inland places like Salisbury Plain. So something that I'd like people to just consider is the effect that this would have had on resources.
David, just to ask you there, looking at the 4 diagrams, the white area is land, is it? Looking at the top left, and the dark area is what, tidal and part land, part undersea?
That's right. It's sort of marshlands. If you look at the top right-hand corner around 7,000 BC, got marshlands, boggy land. I mean, I'm from the Fens, and you know, this is a sort of landscape, very watery with the odd dry patch, and that increasingly goes. So around 6,000 BC, it might be. I think we can definitely say by 5,500 BC, Britain has become Britain.
There's somewhere between 8,000 and 5,500, the physical BC, the physical connection was ended, and that changed everything.
It changed everything. It would have isolated people living on the islands, and we can see that in the artifacts that there are certain British Mesolithic happenings and activities that don't happen elsewhere on the continent. But as I say, it would have compressed people. People would have had to come inland. There would have been lots of problems over resources, which we're only just starting to understand. I think Blickmead is partly important because it becomes early on, for want of a better phrase, a central place, a place that mediates and helps sort difficulties and problems out. And Stonehenge, I think, comes out of that, as we'll see later on. One of the things that's interesting about the site, and this may or may not be to do with the fact that you have these flooded areas, is that we have evidence of people coming to Blickmead from long distances, which is the sort of thing you see much later on at Stonehenge in the Neolithic. So, for example, top left, we have a slate tool which appears to have a West or Northern Welsh provenance. It's possibly come from Cornwall, but slate certainly isn't natural geology to Salisbury Plain, and it's been fashioned into arrow points. Lovely sandstone tool, which I myself excavated actually in 2013. It's a very precious object and really has the feeling of gravitas when you hold it, very weighty thing. That has been provenance to the West Midlands from its petrochemical signature, in other words, the ingredients in the rock. And we also have this extraordinary situation with a dog's tooth, which has been analysed and was first thought to have come from perhaps as far as the north of the Vale of York, and is now thought to be more likely to be East Anglian, although there are still some rogue outlier figures which, if we took them as read, the dog could have come from Scotland, quite extraordinarily, northern Scotland. So I think what we can say about the dog's tooth is that it came from outside of Salisbury Plain. And just if you look at that dog's tooth, we know that dogs were domesticated in the Mesolithic. What we've got there is evidence of a human journey as well, because dogs wouldn't be making that sort of long distance journey by themselves. So signs here of people coming to the site, perhaps some hints there that it is increasingly becoming a hub point, but we need to account for why that would be. Before we do that, I thought this might interest everybody. This is, for my money, the best reconstruction of what a first Britain would have looked like, based on DNA analysis. This is the Natural History Museum. Come from a skeleton found only 40 miles away from Blickmead, and we know that people came from this site. This is a site in Cheddar, which is in Somerset, because we have tools at Blickmead from the same time period from Cheddar. They're from the, again, petrochemical signature shows them to be specific to that landscape. So I think if this helps people visualize what people would have looked like, we've got a black guy with blue eyes, and as you'll see at the end of the talk, it's only much later on in British prehistory when people become to look white and you know, stereotypically British. Let's get back to why people may have been coming to Blickmead. An awful lot of reasons which I haven't got time for because I want to give you this overview of the mystery. But I think a key animal in this landscape is an aurochs, largest animal in Britain, eating a large wild bull, and we found a number of them at Blickmead, would have fed about 300 people. And not only would this animal have been seen as physically the most powerful, but it probably was symbolically so as well. We know from other Mesolithic sites like Star Car in North Yorkshire that people were worshipping red deer, and we think it's very likely that the first religious expression in the Stonehenge landscape was around these animals. We found evidence of them there being a key aurochs migration route running very close to the Stonehenge knoll, which incidentally might be one of the reasons why those totem poles were put there. And I think, just to sum up about them, they would have been a whole mixture of things. Prized kills. Getting something like this down would have involved everybody. Children who have got the best eyesight would have probably been on lookouts. You'd have had elderly people who would have had much better sense of their movement and their behaviours. Religious people. This would have been a mixture of sport, religion, a reason for parties, really a reason for making and keeping bonds for communities. So probably the equivalent of marriages, and certainly children would have come out of these big hunts and feasts as Blickmead increasingly becomes a central place in the landscape, not just for local people, but from people much further afield. Now we've got lots of exciting signs from Blickmead. Maybe the standout is something that we found in the last 18 months, which is this extraordinary stone and bone platform. I mean, no hunter-gatherer site globally has been shown to have made a monument out of stone. It's a very permanent, very permanent type of material to make things, and it suggests that people must be coming back to the place on a very regular basis, and there'll be a lot of them there. Now, I wanted to share some dates with you. We've got dates from the surface which take us extremely close to the first farmers coming into this landscape. In fact, the 4236 to 4052 BC date that you can see on the screen wouldn't usually be seen as hunter-gatherer. It would be seen too late in English terms as a hunter-gatherer date, but it certainly is hunter-gatherer because we've got the evidence in lots of other ways from the sites of them being there. Within the surface, so this is much more likely to date when it was made, the dates come out around 6,500 BC. That is our best guess. But to give you an early reveal of the mystery, of course, a big question for us was what was underneath the surface. And this was filmed by National Geographic in the documentary that Anthony has mentioned. We were very intrigued to know what it was type of covering. And we saw, this is Dr. Barry Bishop, who's also a senior fellow at the University of Buckingham. He started excavating underneath the surface and saw these brown holes. I first wondered if these were wooden posts, but as we got in, and you're going to be some of the very first people to see this, this is much better than what went out on the National Geographic programme, because when they filmed it, it had just come up and hadn't been tidied up. So what you're seeing here is perfectly preserved aurochs hoofprints. Everyone, I'll just press that again, it's such a short sequence. So where the green basket top is, that sort of is where the water's edge is. If I just play it one more time, and I'll point out some features for it. So if we just take this line here, you can see that these are big aurochs feet. They've just stopped at the water's edge, and presumably their heads are bending down to drink. Now, I'm sure, being a wide and diverse audience, there's going to be at least some of you who may be into farming, or you'll know about having livestock. And if so, you'll know that when you have big animals like cattle make marks in wet ground, these things last, well, at the most half a day. So a question that we have is, how on earth were they preserved? And the obvious answer, of course, is the platform surface, but the platform surface must have gone in very quickly to preserve them, and these shapes in the ground must have been of great significance to them. And we wonder if this is in fact a sort of religious expression. Are they operating in the same way that, say, relics do in a cathedral? we have to think about how people would have seen relics in the cathedral in the early medieval period, where saints' relics would have been seen as a proper part of the building, you know, like part of the fabric, part of the materiality of the building that was keeping the building up. So I think we need to think about these hoof prints in those terms. We know something about animism, and it may well be that these aurochs hoof prints, and we've also found lots of bones here, are imbuing the surface somehow with the power of the aurochs as well. So this is a very significant find for the Stonehenge landscape. I haven't got time to dwell on that, but I do want to just take you back to that very late Mesolithic date that we've got from Blickmead, because it beautifully passes the baton on into the early Neolithic. For a long time, scholars of Stonehenge have known that there's evidence of the first farmers, again, absolutely bang on the Stonehenge knoll, just underneath this stone, stone 27. It's a domestic cow bone, dated to 4,340 to 3,980 BC. And so we know it was part of the early farming package because it was a domestic cow, not a wild cow like the aurochs. And so we've got this, again, just to put some colour on this, everyone, we've got this tantalising prospect of Blickmead being the last hunter-gatherer redoubt in England, and people there meeting with the first Neolithic farmers in from the continents. And it looks as though from the dates that there is a connection between the two people. And what this does, if I can put it in a type of straightforward way, is it opens up a door that has been locked tight, that suddenly takes stories and understandings of this landscape, which, as you've seen, go back millennia at Blickmead. This is a very well-known landscape in the hunter-gatherer period, up to around 4000 BC. And then these first farmers are getting access to those stories and mysteries about the landscape. And it seems no coincidence to me that they are putting Stonehenge later on the same knoll that the first Mesolithic posts were put on. And there are plenty of other ritual expressions in between times, as we'll see. Just to give you some up-to-date research evidence, nearby Stonehenge there is a big pit dug around 3800 BC, and this has always been seen as a sort of massive, bingy 3-month or so summer party, and it had always been understood as the first farmers' sort of blowout in the Stonehenge landscape, the first place where they really wanted to mark conspicuously their feasting and all of their stuff, which included pottery. However, as I said earlier, Blickmead is stimulating research all over the place, including by other major Russell Group universities in the UK. And in this instance, Durham University had a close look at the animal bones. And without going into detail, I can draw this together with the conclusion in the report where it says, you can see it in yellow, we argue on the basis of multiple lines of evidence that Conabry represents the material remains of a gathering organised by a regional community. So this is a central, bigger than a local community, with participants coming from different areas. Now listen to this. One group provided deer instead of cattle. We conclude that the most likely scenario is that this group comprised local hunter-gatherers who survived alongside local farmers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an absolute bombshell in prehistoric British archaeology. There's not a site in the whole of Great Britain that has an overlap between these first farmers and the last hunters. And what Peter Rowley-Conway and the Durham team are positing here, using best science, is that the hunter-gatherers are still around and at Blickmead as late as 3800 BC. So let's just put this in a human scale. Families are coming out of that. This is a multicultural landscape right from the beginning of the first farmers coming into the landscape. Indeed, it may well be, and I think it was, a multicultural landscape right from much earlier times when we've got evidence of dogs and stones coming in from the West Midlands and Wales and elsewhere. So this is part, every one, of the genesis of Stonehenge. It's part of, a major part, I'd argue, the reason reason for why it is. And indeed, the regional communities mentioned in the Durham report are almost certainly responsible for these much more obvious looking monuments that get put in about 300 years later. The Stonehenge landscape has a lot of these long barrows, and they're designed to look rather like a house, and these would have been increasingly constructed in the Middle Neolithic. Most intriguingly, the skeleton in one of them, when his teeth were analysed for isotopes, the teeth showed that he was regularly as a child going back and forth from West Wales. Well, and this is around 3600 BC. Why is that significant? Well, he was going back and forth to the very areas where the bluestones were later taken from. So we have to wonder if that movement of bluestones is to do with much earlier movement of people, and it might well be that the guy in the long barrow was following traditions which were much further back than that. The bluestones are these much smaller stones at Stonehenge. They're now surrounded by sarsen, the much bigger stones, but originally they would have been the first stones at Stonehenge, and they haven't moved since probably about 3300 BC.
And why are they called bluestones, David?
Well, they're actually blue looking. They're indigo. That's their basic colour, but they would have been rather beautiful. They had quartz and had quartz inclusions in them which would have sparkled. And some of my colleagues have wondered if they would have looked particularly lovely in moonlight. They also make a strange ringing noise when you hit them. Certainly there are long-standing myths in West Wales of having magical properties. So I'll go into their fabric just right now, if that's okay, Anthony.
Absolutely.
So this gives you a nice visual sense of where these things come from. This is looking small bluestone circle, and actually these stones look a lot darker, but have got less lichen on them. But I'd like you to look into the background, that outcrop of bluestones at Carmenin, where we know that that's one of the bluestone quarries. And I think that's something that's of interest, that there's more than one quarry for these things. And I'm going to be shining a torch on why that might have been a bit longer. And it's an extraordinary idea, actually. Let's get back to some science. Bluestones were put in these holes. Originally, the bluestones were arranged in a circle close to the Stonehenge ditch. So they weren't in the centre of the monument, but radiating around the edge of the circle. And in one of them, this is so-called Aubrey Hole 7, which held a bluestone around 3000 BC, the discovery of cremated remains was found. About 25 people found in that hole. But again, I wanted to share with you absolutely up-to-date research. Latest research shows that 10 of those people, very likely again to have come from West Wales. You can see the dates there. Some of them are going in very early indeed. So I think, just so that everybody's got this clear, these holes are dug, cremated remains, about half of which are from West Wales, are put into the socket, and then the bluestones are put on top. I think we have to be thinking about these bluestones representing maybe family groups, indeed maybe sometimes particular ancestors. And they are quite a human scale, actually. They're sort of suggestive of the human presence. I thought this illustration might help you. This is what Stonehenge looked like around 3000 BC. So you can see in the centre of the monument, there's wooden posts, there's no stones at all. And these bluestones, the smaller stones you can see around the edges of the ditch, as I've said, those are the first things to go in. But there are other really fascinating things about this henge, early henge. One of them is unique.
What does henge mean?
Oh, good question. Well, it's an Anglo-Saxon term, actually, and it means hanging. And it probably came because Stonehenge, people thinking it looked like, the monument looked like gallows, a place where people were hung. But I think it literally means at the time, or it describes at the time, a ditch and then a bank which is usually positioned on the inside of the ditch. In Stonehenge's case, it's rather interesting because the ditch is on the outside. So you almost have a sense, actually, if you're in the middle of the monument, like I've been lucky to be a number of times, as though things are being kept inside Anthony rather than it be the outside being kept in. Really interesting animal remains pockmarked around the ditch. About 50% of them are domesticated animals, 50% from the wild. That's unique, actually, from the British hen site. And I think the placement of these animal bones is really interesting as well. If I can just give you one example, if we look at the southern entrance, which is the one at bottom centre, two cow jaws are facing each other there, and it occurs to me that people that would have walked in through that gap would have very much felt like they were, or perhaps would have felt like they were entering into a mouth, and this would have been a completely different space. They would have been very aware that they were crossing a boundary where there were a lot of wild animals that would have been living in this landscape, a lot of domestic animals that were also part of the landscape, and they were going over the threshold, an ancestral threshold, as they passed by the blue stones. In some ways, you could argue there's a harmony there between people and animals. And this is a very early and extremely sophisticated attempt at a axis mundi. In other words, you have a small world right at the centre of things. That they're creating the world around them in all aspects. The northeast entrance, of course, is on the solstitial alignment, which picks up the midwinter and the midsummer solstice orientations, and I will go into those in a little while.
Just watching the time there.
Yes. Sure you are.
Just speed up just perhaps a bit.
I will do. Stonehenge Phase 2, Sarsens go in around 2,000 and 2,500 BC. If I can, I've made the point, you can see the blue stones there, much smaller. Something I wanted to reveal to everybody is that the blue stones are coming from lots of different places in the Preseli's, and wait for this, it may well be that in Stonehenge Phase 2 they are being arranged in a way that's approximate to the top of those mountain peaks. So I'm going to pause there for you to imagine that. So this is a mini-me version of the Preseli landscape being replicated at Stonehenge. Enormous amount of planning and design. Antti and I had a question earlier about the bluestones getting there. I think perhaps a useful way of thinking about it is that the bluestones would have been a bit like the Olympic torch, moving from community to community. They may well have taken hundreds of years to get to Stonehenge, which gives you an astonishing insight into the very long time depth of the plan and design. But of course, you're giving lots of local communities ownership there. Where did people live who were building Stonehenge? Astonishing thing, Durrington Walls, if I could just point out top right hand corner. Durrington Walls is occupied only for about 40 years, very, very tight radiocarbon dates. And this, what you're looking at there, is probably the place where the people who built Stonehenge Phase 2 were living. Lots of strange goings on. They were only eating, or largely only eating, pig. We know that this was done at Christmas time. There are signs, which I can't go into, of the pigs eating honey and possibly human flesh. Thoughts about the human flesh part are perhaps this is a way of reincarnating people, because the pigs are eating people and people are eating the pigs. Alongside Durrington Walls, I want to give you a scale now of how enormous this landscape is and all the just off the chart things going on. Woodhenge, this gets put in, is next to Durrington Walls. Stonehenge Avenue is being put in around the same time. And I'm not even mentioning Stonehenge Phase 2. I just want people to consider the amount of effort, time and design and planning that's going on. What on earth, what the hell really is going on here? And of course, this is the latest discovery, only in the last month. This enormous shaft circle found around Durrington Walls. I mean, just colossal, 5 meters deep, 10 meters in diameter. This is the thing that's delayed, along with Blickney, the green light for the Stonehenge tunnel. I just want everybody to understand this. This is all happening in a 50-year period. And it's not just happening at Stonehenge. Here we are in Yorkness. Nessa Brodgar is in the small picture, incredibly huge, ornate temple complex. Ring of Brodgar, very near it, it's on the isthmus. Over on the Isle of Lewis, we have the Callanish stones. These are going in at the same time. I'm sorry if I'm postponing your tea, and I'm sure people are listening to this all over the world. I'm sorry if I'm holding you up, but this is amazing. This is major. What is going on in Britain around 2,500 BC that people are having to utterly buy into this? And I don't think people are being forced to do it. People are, they're just colossal resources going in that are taking up the length of Britain to pay for, if you like. Quick speculation on the Neolithic mindset, sort of thing you don't normally get in a lecture. If you look at this beautiful mace head in the middle of the picture, that comes, the material for it comes from the Isle of Lewis. You've just seen the Callanish stones from the Isle of Lewis, as does a more ornate mace head found in Nauf, which is in Ireland. The point is, people and material are coming huge distances here. But what's happening to some of the materials like this? Well, I'm aware of the fact that these things are going deep into tombs, or either into holes or into actual tombs. And it may well be that these very special objects are adding power to the monuments. They may well have been imbued with ancestral power. So these things, when we look at Stonehenge just as stones, there's a lot more going on than just those. So let me just sum up.
Just,
yes, please.
Just a quick question coming in there. You still haven't explained, I think, David, how the stones, the big stones, came 150 miles as the crow flies. And you told me earlier there were no wheels at the time. I didn't realise that.
No, that's quite right. Well, the stones, Anthony, and everyone that are coming 140 miles away are smaller, but they're still about a ton each. And my view is that they are being transported by lots of small groups of people. They may have only been taken a mile or two at a time, and this would be the equivalent of villages buying into that procession to take them to Stonehenge. And probably, food is being made available for people. People are being given a bed for the night, and these things are processing from West Wales across to Britain very slowly. But the target is always to put them in here. The much bigger stones, the Sarsens, they come from 20 miles away. Now, this is a massive engineering feat. One idea is that they may have been rolled during wintry periods when there was a lot of ice. One idea is that that wooden rollers were used to take them there, and that they were being put up using A-frames. But I want everybody to appreciate it. We live in such busy lives, and I'm under time pressure now to get this delivered to you. I don't think these type of modern Western capitalist senses of time were present. I think actually the fact of moving things would have been a religious observance in itself. And look at this henge. I think what people are doing here is they're building gods. That's their motivation. But along with that, they are embedding in the design settings, the past, including animals. That's, again, very modern Western sense that we don't regard animals. I think people are very conscious of the importance of animals and the spiritual aspects of them as well. Links to positives of people, animals, people and their geographies, as you've seen them from different places. And look at the design, these circles, the circle of the ditch, the circle of the bluestones and the Albury holes, the circle of the Sarsens, and in Stonehenge Phase 2, more bluestones in the centre. So this seems to me to be a very symbolically harmonious structure, and I think unity is being foreshadowed here. Now, why would that be? If I can quickly say about religious experience, you very rarely get archaeologists putting their toe in the water when it comes to this, but I just wanted to share this with you. I think, what would people have experienced? I think that in what they would have experienced, just like us really, they would have experienced the place in various ways. Some may have taken substances. We shouldn't forget drugs in prehistory. It would probably help us understand things if we factored them in a bit more. Others would have relied on chanting and drumming, sensory deprivation. Other people would have had intense meditation to get into a trance state. I think fear possibly is an element. You know, when you're taking extraordinary objects like those mace heads and putting them underground, people may well have been aware of the underground being another world. Others may simply have experienced a calm and a relief and a euphoria from participating in rituals with many other people. And actually, that last sentence is something that probably a lot of us are missing because of lockdown. But let me come to the nub here, and this might explain why. And that is what Anthony wanted me to do. Everything stops, everyone, around 2400 BC, or pretty much everything stops after all that action all over Britain. Now, why might that be? Well, we've got very recent, as in last year it was peer reviewed, genetic evidence that shows about 90% of the ancestry of modern Britons was replaced by Beaker people around 2450 BC. And when you saw the Black hunter-gatherer at the beginning of the talk, this is the time, around 2450 BC forwards, when people start to get skin and eye pigmentation similar to mine and the majority of Britons today. Quite startling. These people, as you can see on the inserts, they're the first people to bring gold in. They're the first people who can make metal. And if you look at that jug, it looks like they're the first people who can brew beer properly as well. And that may well have had some sort of magical consequence. Last two slides, and I'd love to have questions if there's time. Always got new stories. One of them is the tunnel. Anthony will know very well that University of Buckingham has led the fight against the tunnel. We may well be getting there. This is me on the in the Times. There's been a meeting at Westminster Hall that some Conservative MPs actually were behind to put at the front of the shop the fears.
Is the person on the right an example of early man?
Well, quite arguably, yes. I mean, I think both of those people in the front of the picture have got Beaker ancestry, but I don't think that they're direct ancestors. Let's say that, or certainly not near ones. I wanted everybody to just take note. This is the last slide. Probably we've had all this astonishing history, all this new research, all the new stuff I've given to you has only come out in the last 18 months. But the biggest destructive impact, indeed in a way the biggest earthwork that will ever happen, Stonehenge, or will have ever happened in the Stonehenge landscape up to now, will be this blasted tunnel. So I know that this group has people of influence in it. So please do use your influence. Do, as Walt Whitman said, permit yourself to speak at every hazard, because Stonehenge is much more special than probably most of us think it is, and it's unutterably precious. It should be available for youngsters, for generations, in perpetuity, to be looked at and researched, and for the new stories to be conjured up from it. Thank you very much.
A wonderful, wonderful talk there, and we're going to see you now back fully on screen. We're going to go straight into questions. How much of the totality of what can be known about the Stonehenge site do we know already? 5%, 50%, or 80%?
That's such a good question. I think actually if you only went back 10 years ago, a type of mature archaeologists in the area would say that they were getting close to cracking it. And I think that with the discovery of Blickmead and other sites like the Shaft, and alongside new technology and scientific methods, we are back at around the 5%, Anthony.
So we're going backwards. That's marvellous. I mean, this whole talk, by the way, has been a brilliant demonstration about the excitement and the importance of research and what university life and the life of the mind is all about. Next question, presumably London was not around at the time that Stonehenge was there, or was there something in London?
No, nothing clear. In the Mesolithic, funnily enough, there was a major hunter-gatherer settlement at Heathrow, right underneath Heathrow Airport.
Okay.
But nothing London. But of course, London would have been trashed by all the later building.
And so next question is, didn't quite understand your point there about why things stopped in 2400 BC.
Thank you for saying that. I was hoping someone would ask that question. Well, we have this situation where it looks as though there's a almost wide scale DNA replacement. That must mean that Beaker people were not particularly friendly to the late Neolithic people.
Where did they
come? Hard to say exactly, but probably originated from the Russian steppes. They sort of found their way across from Turkey through to Germany. It's just a steady advance because people have got access to these new technologies. Highly mobile, very good on a horse, all of that sort of stuff.
So to understand
no,
that.
I'm not. Sorry, can I just address that question? It's such a key question. So one of my arguments is that all of these henges and all of these earthworks and all of these resources are, and I think that this chimes with something in the present day. They're to do with fear. They're to do with bringing people together because of a threat. And so that might well be why Stonehenge is a monument to unity, and it's drawing together threads from the Isle of Lewis and the Isle of Orkneys and Ireland and Wales. You know, it's Great Britain. It's extraordinary. But people are dealing with a big threat.
Is there anything in way lines, and is there anything in Glastonbury being special, and why Stonehenge there rather than Glastonbury?
I must admit I'm not in favour of it. I think actually the problem with ley lines and that type of thinking, though I respect people for having those points of view, the problem with them is that in a way they dumb down the reasons for why these places are there. They're so complicated and sophisticated. There are so many different reasons why these things get built where they do. They've got massive, long lives, these places, and they're to do with the sky, and they're to do with local topography, they're to do with animals and people. So I don't think, and there's not any scientific evidence for ley lines either. Just from my point of view, I'm more interested in following the lines of evidence.
Maria asks David, what can be done to limit the damage being done to the stones from, she mentions, not traffic and tunnels, but pollution and climate change?
Well, I would straight away make the whole area a national park. I'm sure there's American people listening to this. I've been lucky with my Fulbright. I can see national parks work, and in fact they work commercially as well. They're good for local areas. And I think from a pollution point of view, they're very good too. If we have to have a tunnel, it needs to be a much longer one that enters northern Wiltshire and exits it far, far further away than this special landscape. I think we all know that. Anybody listening to this, intuitively, we know that this place is special.
Stuart says, who's a student at University of Buckingham, David, I'd love to have an opportunity to join a dig. How can I do that?
Well, Stuart, we have one in September, actually. Get in touch with me afterwards. Love to involve you. The University of Buckingham students are very lucky that they've got, their first place in the queue to come to the stones and see what we're doing. And
other people looking, I think they're 1,300 looking at this. If you want to write to david.jakes@buckingham.ac.uk. If that doesn't work, please come via my office. Now, Robin is saying, why is the discovery of goods from across the UK evidence of people travelling to Blickmead rather than trade?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. Well, of course, was that Robin?
Yeah.
Yeah, Robin is right, of course. It doesn't have to be people, but I suppose the fact that those objects get to Blickmead probably underscores the idea that it's a hub point and that it's known. So either people are knowing about it either way. I think it's more likely that there are very famous hunts going on in this landscape, and people want to get involved in them in the same way that Stuart, the University of Buckingham student, wants to get involved in the dig.
Lisa says, asks about how those top stones there. I don't know whether people can see the picture. If not, Matt, can you put the picture up? How do the stones on the top get there without modern tools?
Brilliant question, Lisa. The best guess from all of us is an inch at the top of quite counterintuitive, that people may have slowly dug piles of earth, putting the stones on top of the earth, and then little bit by little bit that earth took the lintel up to the top and then was taken away.
Sarah asks about the knowledge that we've lost. Can we ever recover the knowledge that we've lost? Not least about building.
Yes, so I'm really sympathise with that. I think that it's going to be very difficult to get all of the knowledge. I mean, these people weren't able to read or write. I haven't had a chance in this talk, but I'm very interested in looking at the Neolithic mindsets and trying to pull together common denominators in terms of design factors, where objects are put in the ground, to get some idea of how people were thinking. That's probably the nearest we can get to it.
So many questions now. Graham Davis, fellow academic, were the builders of Stonehenge most interested in the finished monument or in the process of moving the stones building it?
I plump for the process. I think moving the stones is, as I said earlier, but probably rather too quickly, moving the stones is part of the religious experience. In fact, the word animate means to bring the spirit out. I think moving brings the spirit out, and as I said earlier, in effect, people are building God here.
Scott asks about links to help in the fight against the tunnel. Scott, do write to David on that. John asks, are there other sites that share similarities? So which would you showed some? Which would you particularly point to?
I think that the Brodgar Circle and the Brodgar Ness in the Orkneys is the closest, because it has that in the Orkneys, yes. Yeah. But no stone circle has the lintels. Lisa's point.
Lisa's point. An anonymous question here, better be the last, is why is the conceptual design of CERN, which is the European project on trying to understand the nature of matter, similar to the design of Stonehenge? Is there any correlation?
Well, I'm sure there wasn't an understood one. I'm not sure that they were conscious of it, but as I said earlier, I think Stonehenge suggests to all of us a unity. Thinking of the lintels, the way the stones are joined together, there's the circle shapes, whether it's the ditch or the inner ring or the outer ring of stones. What we're looking at here is something that is stressing unity and bringing things together.
And a question just in saying, absolutely fascinating talk, David. Thank you very much. And we're going to finish it there because we always try and finish on time. Thank you, everyone, for looking. For more information, please write to David Jacques and at the University of Buckingham or elsewhere. Please find out more about what we're doing. We'd love to hear from you. So talk tomorrow night on food and poetry and good loving for lockdown. And then next week, as I said, Rory Stewart is talking about his time in Afghanistan and beyond. We have Luke Johnson, the entrepreneur, Greg Doran, the head of the RSC. Then we're taking a break, and then many more people in September. Do spread news about the talks. If you can't, just write to us at the University of Buckingham, share them with friends. They're always, all the talks are gratis and it's part of the university's outreach, and do share them with friends. But above all, and not the least, for helping me out, David, at 1 o'clock, I was a little concerned when the sad news came through from Lord John Brown. And I immediately thought that you were very proud of your brilliance and your brilliant communication and your enthusiasm and your connection of archaeology to science and anthropology and religion and philosophy. The way that all links together was just a masterclass, person class. Thank you. From all of us, very, very much, David Jacques. Have a good rest of the evening, everybody, and good night.
Good night. Thank you for everything you've done for us, Anthony.
Bless you. Thank you.